one is here after a week 0 result that reminds us no matter how much this game changes, no matter how much you change the format, no matter how many teams are in the playoff, one thing will always persevere and win. Run the ball.
44 yards away to do it. He got it. He got it. And the Yellow Jackets did it. Upset in hand. They found themselves a pot of gold at the end of their Irish rainbow.
As a former offensive lineman, how much pride did you have watching that group control the line of scrimmage?
Are you kidding me? Run the ball.
This is the College Game Day podcast for Monday, August 26th. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel, fresh off a transatlantic, is that the right term, Pete? Flight back or across the Atlantic from Dublin back to the United States of America and watching the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets stun Florida State in the season opener 24-21, and what was an absolutely thrilling finish for the Jackets and a real punch in the gut for the Seminoles, but a fun week 0 and a great way to start.
A great 60-minute game, right? Mm-hmm. There was momentum shifts. There was the start where you're like, oh, Florida State's going to score 70. There were shifts back. There was like, there won't be a forward pass completed in this game. Georgia Tech goes down and completes 5 for 5, and then DJ comes back with those 2 fourth down conversions. In a couple random observations that have nothing to do with each other. One is the thing I'll remember. One of the weird things I remember at that game. You and I are lucky enough to be at a lot of college football games. There was nobody on the sidelines of that game. Does that make sense? Like there was just there's usually staff, family, recruits.
You mean like down where we were standing and watching the game?
There was like 2 teams, and that was it. And so it just made it feel like very different, right? That there was just nobody. There was just like it just felt very, very different. It was in a rugby stadium, and obviously it rained 6 times during the game. There's also reached the rare game where we had talked about this in the preview pod. Like if you had said this is the exact game plan Georgia Tech needs in order to win the game, it went perfectly. Like it could not have been scripted better. You got a little bit of a slick service to neutralize the speed. You had that 1 8-minute, clock Nasher in the second quarter to shorten the game. I saw a stat that it was the least amount of possessions, 7 for each team, that had happened in a college football game since I believe 2020. So like that would be like straight out of a Brent Key fever dream, right? That you have it to be that short, and just everything lined up for Tech. Now, I give them a ton of credit. Like they set the tone up front. I thought it was a lot of fun field level to watch the shifts and misdirections of Buster Faulkner's offense. You could see the Seminoles flat-footed. You could see them going the wrong way. It was really just like the perfect amount of window dressing. And when they got a little momentum going, you could tell Florida State was really on their heels. So just a banger of a game from wire to wire, and what a way, as Joe Tess's great call said, what a way to start the football season. Yeah, no question. And along those lines, in addition to the shifts and the motions, when they ran a good bit of counter, and when they would run counter plays, Florida State, and weren't really over pursuing. It was like Florida State was always a man short. The proverbial hat was on the hat, and then one guy to beat for the back, often in open space, and often with the defender trying to change directions. I thought the turning point of the game was the first snap from scrimmage for Georgia Tech, because Florida State had marched down. They'd gotten the touchdown. They got the 2. It's 8-0. Now you're wondering, are they going to try to catch the point for the rest of the game? And Georgia Tech, they don't try to get a chunk play. They don't try to trick them. They give the ball to Jamal Haynes, whose parents were in Front Row College Game Day on Saturday afternoon, by the way, Saturday afternoon, Dublin time. That'll get you.
And yeah, that's right. Yes, it will. And they blow them off the ball, and they create a cutback lane for Haynes, and he rips off 14. And then they go chunk. They go 14 on the ground, 10 on the ground, then the big pass play from Haynes King to Malik Rutherford for 42. Now Florida State still is unable to bow up because they give it to Haynes again and he gets 9. And then a couple of quarterback runs, one from Haynes King, and then one accurately called by you on game day, bringing in Zach Pyron to run it in for the touchdown. And now they've answered. And not only have they answered, they'd set the tone that, okay, maybe all you guys are going to get drafted. And you're also not going to push us around. And it was, they took the fight to them in, long drives. And Florida State had a long drive. It chewed up some clock too. So, I think the alarm that Florida State fans are feeling is a bit exaggerated. They still have a really talented team. They've still got a deep team, some growing pains. Maybe they need to turn DJ loose a little bit. Maybe they, if he's going to be your guy, maybe you trust him. And I think that is something, and this is not Mike Norvell specific. This is coaches. Coaches, as a rule, often think, what could go wrong? How can I make him comfortable? I got to make him comfortable, take care of him. Sometimes the best way to make a quarterback particularly, and players, athletes generally, comfortable is to act like you believe in them by saying, go get it, kid. Go get him, cowboy. Let it rip. And, maybe that's something they'll look at from this point forward. And, because, hey, we're going to talk Georgia Tech, and they've earned that. Mm-hmm. But, Florida State showed a little lower intestinal fortitude with those fourth down conversions and the drive to tie the game. They just were unable to get the stop when they needed it to force overtime and see if they could win the game there.
Yeah. And again, we spent a lot of time thinking about Georgia Tech because we were doing game day there and it's the only game. And the one thing modern college football allows you to do, Rece, it allows you to overhaul a bad unit, right? You pointed out last week here that I think Georgia Tech's run defense was somewhere in the bottom 5 of the country last year.
It was terrible. Yeah.
Yes, it was the worst. So they bring in 7 new starters, bunch of guys up front. We saw Romello Height have a moment that he now regrets, but get to the court. They didn't have a twitch guy off the edge like Romello Height before. They didn't have interior D-line depth. They had some injuries, by the way, and those guys got healthy, but they acquitted themselves very well up front. They bring in a new play caller in Tyler Santucci. And what I think the hope for Georgia Tech that Saturday night in Dublin represented, Rece, was that they knew they had a top-tier quarterback in Haynes King, and he played every bit of it. I think 16 runs, 15 passes, or 15 runs and 16 passes. He told me after the game, he said, I'm going to keep running the ball. I'm not afraid. We're not going to, they aren't going to put him in kid gloves. They're going to go. So you have the quarterback. You have the scheme. They're not going to be afraid to run him. They're going to drain the clock. They're going to focus on the trenches. They have a very good offensive line, returned 4 starters, brought in the right guard from Middle Tennessee, who they really liked. And he did have the false start penalty in the 4th, but, played generally well. They have the ethos of toughness under Brent Key, which was prevalent in there. And now they have a functioning defensive front, and they have a functioning front 7 on defense. They were good enough last year with that being a liability, and now it's sound and solid. Tyler Santucci came from Duke, where he was with Mike Elko. And a lot of the fundamentals of that defense are they did not give up big plays. I want to say that Toafili run was the biggest play of the game, the touchdown run on the first drive. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, Florida State didn't do anything on the ground. Mm-hmm. I mean, nothing. Georgia Tech completely whipped their offensive line at the line of scrimmage. And that put a lot of pressure on DJ. From talking to some coaches after the game, one of the things I thought they did a really good job of, and when they said this, it clicked, was even the short stuff was hard for DJ. Everything that he was throwing short was to the field side. They clouded the boundary and made the boundary crowded. So the so-called easy release throws were 5-yard throws that had to travel 25 yards. And DJ is not the most accurate quarterback. We've seen that, over time. He's also just not an elite runner, right? He looked like a tepid runner the other night. So they did what good defensive coaches do. They put him in positions where he didn't appear comfortable. And they were not able to sort of take what was given because of that. So a lot of credit to Georgia Tech, how they hung in, how they fought. They are an ACC contender, Rece, simply put.
And Santucci did a great job, well-timed interior pressures that, made Toafili or Roydell Williams, Cam Davis, whoever's running the ball, be greeted by almost a free runner, almost as soon as they got the ball on several occasions. I know there was a gap one time. I think it was in the first half. Williams had a gap if he beats the one guy, but almost as soon as he touches the ball, he didn't have much of a chance to avoid that tackle. So Santucci was terrific there. And as I said to you on the sideline too, my wife and my daughter were with me on the trip, and Elizabeth was filming the game just probably to get something for her social media for fun or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the one pass to the point about DJ's accuracy, as I was watching, I was like, oh, he's got him. This could be, I say he's got him for touchdown. And it was first half, Florida State was coming toward us. So I guess it was the second quarter, and he missed him. He just left the ball short. It was the diving play in the corner, like inside the 10-yard line. I've forgotten who the receiver was now, but he made a diving effort on the ground. The ball just short hopped. And I'm a fan of DJ as a guy, and I want him to succeed. So I don't like seeing all of the, this is all DJ's fault, nonsense that you see on social media. He's got plenty of time. It was the first game. It's a new system, different environment. And I'm not trying to make excuses for him either. He must play better. There's no doubt. He made some clutch plays late to give them a chance. He must play better consistently. Everyone understands this. Most notably, DJ Uiagalelei understands this. And I hope he does. And it's a long season for them, and they'll have a chance to bounce back. But you said Georgia Tech is a contender in the ACC. Now, one game does not cure every ill. And Georgia Tech under Brent Key is now 5-0 against ranked ACC opponents.
This is a setup. Florida State's ranked. That means old Brent Key has them right where he wants them. Brent Key as a head coach, 4-0 against ranked ACC opponents.
But as all of us have pointed out, they lost to Bowling Green last year. They squandered a game against Boston College. This is the challenge now, because I was talking with Jay Bath, the athletic director at Georgia Tech, on the sideline on practice on Friday, and we were talking about either way. You have to respond to this. If a heartbreaking loss, blowout loss, or win, all of those things carry different challenges when you come back, because you haven't won the ACC because you beat the reigning champion. And Florida State is not eliminated because they lost this opening game. So you'll find out about Georgia Tech. They've got a couple of tough road games in September, Syracuse and Louisville, and now they'll have to respond. It'll also be interesting to see if they might be a tad sluggish this weekend, relatively short turnaround when you factor in the travel day. Non-conference game, is it? Well, they have Georgia State.
Georgia State debut, and that game's obviously at Tech. I was going to say in Atlanta, but they're both in Atlanta, so it is at Tech. I thought Key summed up where Georgia Tech is very concisely. He said, "At first, we learned how not to lose. Then we talked about learning how to win. The next step in the journey is learning how to win consistently." And I thought that was like a very nice summary of like where they've been, where they are, and where they still need to go. And that means, you have to go and beat Georgia State. You have to go to the Carrier Dome, beat a talent. Oh, sorry. It's not the Carrier Dome anymore. I'm just old.
Sure it is. It's always the Carrier. It's a Carrier Dome
in my heart, Rece. In my heart.
What is it? J something?
JWA Wireless, I think.
Yeah, it's
or
a wireless
JW
company.
Wireless. Yes. Yes.
Something like that.
We got to get you some of that JWA Wireless after your internet problems this morning.
I don't know what's happening. The good people at the cable company who doesn't sponsor our show, they have the exemplary internet here, but we had to plug in this morning instead of in using the wireless. We've got the latest, fastest, most up-to-date gateway, but we might have to upgrade that thing. We've rebooted it. I don't know what's going on.
You're doing good. You're doing good. Hey, it's still week one, right? There's going to be some kinks. But there's opportunity for Tech in this. If they beat Georgia State, they get that road win at Syracuse, and then they have VMI at home. You can go to Louisville 4-0 probably ranked. They should be ranked. There's no new poll this week, but they should be ranked. After the week 1 poll, assuming they beat Georgia State. Then you've got your bye week late September. Like, you could all of a sudden now you got Duke, you got at Carolina, and then Notre Dame comes to Atlanta October 19th. So again, they have a difficult schedule. I think it's 11 bowl teams on there. They obviously they obviously close at Georgia, which is never easy. All my clock times are still on Irish times, by the way, so I'm very confused because they're playing at Georgia at 12:30 a.m. Dublin time. I haven't fixed my laptop yet, so
mine did that automatically. I mean, because that caused a problem. I put out, as you know, Pete, I try to give everyone, our entire staff, a bit of a head start on things I'm thinking, games and stuff. So I was going through the schedule on the plane yesterday and doing some work. I don't recommend a 6-hour flight every Sunday after game day, but it does provide you some great solitude to really knock out some work.
Yeah.
And I was having to decipher, because I wanted for our staff to focus on Saturday games and not, we'll talk the Thursday, Friday games, but those games will have been played by the time we go on the air. And I was having to do this, decipher, okay, wait, this says this is Saturday, but it says it's, 3:30 in the morning. So it's really Friday late on the West Coast and all of that, so I don't know.
I did not stay up for SMU Nevada. Did you?
No, I was following it a little bit on the phone for a while, but I checked the backside. By the way, that could lead us to the dumb loses more than smart wins quickly for Brandon Crossley, who was ejected for allegedly spitting on the player.
They're down right now for Nevada, and there's flags that are flying all over the place. A player for Nevada was down away from those flags.
And I want to, from Nevada, and SMU ended up coming back to win that game. But I do want to say this before we get this, and I'm going to try to remind people every week when we do dumb loses more than smart wins. It means the act, not the person who committed the act. We all, including me, you do dumb things does not mean you're a dumb person. And what Brandon Crossley lost in dumb loses more than smart wins is the opportunity to play for the entire game. He's an important guy, and I'm sure it's a lesson learned. But he lost the opportunity to win the game or to play the game, and was fortunate that his team went on to win the game. So now we have our smoothly segued into not being able to watch every second of SMU Nevada due to being in Dublin, into dumb loses more than smart wins. You and I walked together to practice, to Georgia Tech practice, and probably along the way when we were walking over there, you start to get gut feelings about upsets. And I'd been having the gut feeling through the offseason. It was probably the angst and animosity that the Florida State fans had looking back at last year. And I remember a lot of old coaches, I'm walking down memory lane here, but people always try to be dismissive of fans' attitudes about games. And I can remember even back in the old days, Bear Bryant saying that you can often get a gauge on your team by the temperature of the fans about a game, about whether they're overlooking a game or whatever it might be. And that was before this was pervasive. Now this has been, whether the Florida State players tried to ignore it, and even with all the players who weren't even part of the team last year tried to ignore it, it's there. So I'm thinking, boy, this is the classic ripe for an upset. You get them early. Georgia Tech has a new defensive coordinator who, Santucci, who's really good. They've got another year together. You mentioned, even though they returned 4 starters on the offensive line, they felt they had an upgrade at guard with transfer from Middle Tennessee. All of these things were adding up. And you go out and you watch Georgia Tech practice, and you think, hey, this is pretty good. Now, full confessional time. I also went to Florida State practice. And then when they came out, I was like, oh, yeah, that's what it's supposed to look like. And there was great energy, and it was a great practice, and they've got a beautiful-looking football team. And I will confess right there that I was not with Seamus on the bandwagon after that.
My head says FSU. My head says FSU, but my heart says Georgia Tech, because Listen, this country.
This guy. I mean, this guy.
I love going against the grain. I love it. Let me hear you loud. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Because I thought Georgia Tech will fight them and they will wear down. You know, ultimately they will wear down and Florida State will win the game. That's what I thought. And man, you know, as we mentioned, you know, perimeter runs, different things sort of maybe gas the Florida State defensive line or make them a little less effective. Beautiful game plan and everything. And I would say the lesson is trust your gut, you know, about upsets. But then the flip side of it is the other also happens. Sometimes you get the upset and the momentum and the nostalgia and all of this kind of stuff with the story. Here it comes. This is like one of those storybook upsets. And then the big, powerful, fast, deep team comes in and just stomps them, you know, so goes both ways. But I'm not going to say I felt the upset until I saw both teams practice. Both teams had good practices, but it just seemed like Florida State had more, you know, it seemed like they had more big, fast bodies. They had, you know, but man, that was just such a great performance by the Jackets to win that game.
I saw the same exact thing you saw. I believe on our preview podcast, I said I thought Georgia Tech would cover the whatever it was, 10.5, 11. Like I thought it would be a close game. When I walked out of Aviva after the Florida State practice, I was like, physics do not like they just looked like different paradigms of physical players. So again, that is said to over compliment the Tech staff for figuring out schemes, ways, building toughness. I know they're very proud of their sports science program there. They feel like that's a competitive advantage for them. I just really feel like, especially offensively, and look, I was very complimentary of Florida State's defensive line on game day. I want to be very blunt about that. I do think they are an individually talented group still. I mean, they have 2 All-ACC players returning, some really freaky guys who came in via the portal. Jackson 2 years ago, he played 1 game last year, and obviously Marvin Jones Jr. looks unbelievable on the hoof. But there's a difference between walking off the bus and NFL Combine in performance. And Georgia Tech's offensive line performed. Give Jeep Wade credit. He reminded me, the Georgia Tech O-line coach on the field after the game, that I told him I thought Florida State's defensive line was the best in the country. He reminded me that the performance did not agree with my analysis. So we'll take that and we'll take that in stride and roll with it. But look, Rece, it's college football. It's the power of togetherness. It's the power of experience. It's the power of coaching. You can overcome more talented teams with cohesion. Some of this stuff is a little bit lost in the portal era. I mean, how many of our predictions are based on like, well, they have that guy here, and if he fits from there, and they got the dude coming in from fill in the blank. And with Georgia Tech, it was like, well, they have all these guys and they're really good and they played well, and they have a scheme designed to neutralize superior talent, and that's exactly what it did. So people will call better games than Buster Faulkner called on Saturday night, but I don't know. That's going to be a top 10 masterpiece of the season, in my opinion.
Been a little bit. Now I want to give you props. You don't take compliments well. I've noticed that during the evolution of our friendship. But I want to encourage you, if you are a fan of the written word, game recaps, which covering games and writing game stories used to be a staple of how sports fans consumed sports. It was really important to go and get the Sunday paper after a college football Saturday and read not only the account of the game that you, depending on how old you are, that you either watched or you listened to, but to see what was said about it beyond what the coaches or players might have said, but also incorporating that. And now everything is much more quick blurb, get it on the internet, listen quickly, look at it quickly. How did it go? On to the next thing. I want to read you a couple of paragraphs by a gifted wordsmith, a man called Pete Thamel. This is the lead paragraph to his Georgia Tech Florida State story. For a school that churns out astronauts and engineers with numbing efficiency, spontaneous moments of joy are easily traced to meticulous preparation. That's a Grantland Rice type lead outlined against a blue-gray October
or
sky.
Yellow Jackets.
Or Horsemen of the Apocalypse wrote again. That's a brilliant lead for this story. And then the other one that really I thought was just just spectacular. As I scrolled, I've got to find it again now in your game story. I should have marked it on my phone. I like this one too, where you touched O'Leary, Paul Johnson, Bobby Ross, the history of their. Here it is. The win on a misty Saturday in the Aer Lingus Classic came thanks to deft execution of a game plan that produced 190 rushing yards, a game clock that ran like a podcast on 1.5 speed, which no one would ever do that to us, and a pressure cooker that demanded every possession be treated like a Fabergé egg. I mean, we can't, I'm going to go off football for just a minute. We can't lose the written word and communicating in the written and spoken word. This was just extraordinary work, and that's enough bragging on you. Now we should go back to making fun of you for something.
No,
but
please do.
It was just
I was at Georgia
it was just. I mean, I read this.
You.
I read this, and I was like, I felt like I was transported, and this is a compliment. I felt like I was transported in time back to when the classic sports writers wrote that way. And I mean, it was brilliantly done.
So you're just calling me old?
No, I'm saying
I did do
classic.
that for a long time. So
Classic.
Yeah.
Classic.
No, it was fun, Rece. It was fun I did not bring my laptop to the stadium because of logistics of where game day was or whatever. So Modern Technology took my phone, interviewed a couple guys after the game. Brent Key was very generous with his time and walked back the 1.5 miles to the hotel and ordered some Chinese food and wrote a story. And it was great. It was yeah, I don't get to do that as much as I used to. So it was a lot of fun. And I mean, look, could you have scripted a better game? Like, even if Florida State came back and won an overtime or something, but like, it was just every possession. It was like what we love about college football: the passion, the momentum swings. It was a great reminder of why we all love this, and what a cool setting and what a great city. Like, it just was, everything about it was awesome. So it was. I have a lot of gratitude for being able to go, and thank you for the nice words.
Saw Joe Hamilton, the former Georgia Tech quarterback, legendary player there at halftime.
He was there 9 years. That's why.
Yeah. And Joe was talking about expectations for Georgia Tech, and obviously they felt like they could win the game. And he said we're not going to be, in all likelihood, in the national championship picture every year perennially. Mm-hmm. He said, but we need to avoid the, Orange Bowl, no bowl, back to middle tier bowl, no bowl, big bowl, and the big rides, he said, and build toward when you get the older team, when you've kept some guys together, then you build yourself into playoff contention. And then, then maybe you have to recalibrate and do it again. And I think that is what they term as realistic expectations, knowing who you are, because that's something I'm probably going to go off on game day at some point, is people who say unrealistic expectations. I keep hearing that phrase from a variety of people, particularly as it pertains to Ohio State. Mm-hmm. No, they aren't. It's unrealistic expectation for Ohio State to win the national championship. Well, of course it's not. That's not unrealistic. Overreaction to not meeting that, is probably what you mean. So I'm probably being persnickety with the choice of words, but it's not unrealistic, nor is it unwarranted. But when you're in a position like Georgia Tech, which throughout its history has had some really good teams, and in the old days, under Bobby Dodd, they were a power, but basically for more than a half century, they've had some really good moments, and they've built into occasionally having great teams. And I think what Joey was talking about was that you build into having great teams more often, and with a formula that allows you to do it regularly while not dropping off quite as far, when you don't. And I certainly, the 1 week indication is that Georgia Tech is building in the right direction, but it's a long season ahead. And also, I want to say this about Florida State, and then we'll move on quickly here. From Florida State's standpoint, sky's not falling, season's not over. And you know what else is true? While Georgia Tech played brilliantly, Florida State didn't play its best. They didn't. They didn't play their best game. That happens. It's sports. Sometimes you start pressing a little bit, things don't quite work, you get a little out of sync. They just didn't play their best game. That's okay. Nobody plays their best game every time. And I'm sure they would like to have played better on that stage. I'm sure it would have made the day after the game sightseeing trip that the Seminoles were scheduled to stick around for a bit more pleasant. But, hey, they've got a lot of football in front of them, a lot of opportunities, a lot of big games. They have the opportunity to still get in the playoffs, still win the ACC, all of those things. Now, I did see someone point out that because of schedules and who plays whom and all of that kind of stuff, that in theory, depending on what happens, they could find themselves at a tiebreaker disadvantage. But that's so far down the road. That's a bridge to jump off of in mid-November. It's not one to deal with before September 1st gets here,
Yeah. No, there's plenty of opportunity that still waits on that schedule, Reese. You got Clemson coming in, you go to Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
Look, we are in an era where teams with losses, it's like the AFC East. You're going to go lose a game at the Jets and you're going to come back and win the next. Like, it's where we are. They obviously did not want to lose any of them. They certainly didn't want to lose the opener, and they were a double-digit favorite. But there is still plenty of talent there and plenty of opportunity, and it is a new era, right? It's 12-team playoff. It is more forgiving for Florida State. Now, in conference, they have a little less room for error, and that's real. But
that makes a couple games coming up this weekend important for perception. It's not be all end all or anything of that nature, because you'll have plenty of the SEC, ACC matchups at the end of the season that will carry some weight as well.
Yeah.
But Miami versus Florida, Clemson versus Georgia, those types of things will help shape the early perception of the ACC.
Carolina, Minnesota, I think is real there.
Yeah, there are fewer. I would say that one leaps to mind. I will be honest and say off the top of my head, I can't think of the other ACC Big Ten matchups, which will also be important in that type of evaluation.
Yeah,
but,
I don't think there's a bunch.
I
can't think any off the top of my head. BC plays Michigan State.
Okay.
So that's, one of the crossovers there. Maryland plays Virginia. So again, those aren't the highest level ones, but there are a few in that realm. I believe Rutgers goes to Virginia Tech.
That one among the ones you said is the one that maybe carries a little more, because Rutgers' schedule might have them on the edge of evaluation, or something as the season unfolds.
Rutgers wins that game, they solidify themselves as a top 25 team, and then they can dream with their schedule. They lost Mo Torre, the linebacker, last week in camp. That was a tough loss for them. He's probably the best player in that program. And probably the best NFL prospect in the pros. This is a big, tough loss. They have a good linebacker room there. So it's not a position of dire need, but that's a really good player for them. The other ACC SEC this weekend, Reese, is Virginia Tech goes to Vandy, don't they, to open?
Yes, I think it's the other way around. Is it not? I was thinking. Let me look. I'm scrolling through the planner that I sent out. Vanderbilt at Virginia Tech is what I have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's an interesting game, because Vanderbilt is coming, but it's sort of like New Mexico State's coming. With they brought Tim Beck, who I pointed out in the note that I sent out to everybody. Tim Beck from New Mexico State, not to be confused with Tim Beck from Coastal.
Correct. They're different people for sure.
Yeah, the Tim Beck at Coastal is the guy who was at Ohio State, Nebraska, and Texas, other places. Different guy. But he brought Diego Paiva with him, who was a high school wrestler who beat Auburn and Jordan Hare last year. I think didn't he get a personal foul in that Auburn game, like body slamming maybe a guy after a turnover or something like that? I think so.
Well, I mean, Diego Paiva's legacy is from the bowl game. Remember, they played in the New Mexico Bowl, and there was a little bit of a tiff. They would not let them practice, and they did end up practicing because he went and allegedly urinated on the logo of the New Mexico practice field or the facility, because he was mad that they didn't offer him a scholarship. So it was internal discipline.
That is not. I laugh not to condone such behavior, but it's pretty wild. I wish I could.
No, that's if you're an undersized competitor, that shows a sign of your competitiveness.
I mean, I'm sure some of our podcast listeners will. I just remember watching with my jaw dropped. I was at my wife and I were visiting my father-in-law who was ill, and he's Auburn alumnus and big Auburn fan, and watching that game. And for some reason, I remember him just picking up a guy and body slam him, getting a personal foul penalty.
He did do that. He did do that.
He's a tough dude. And now they've brought a lot of that New Mexico State.
Jerry Kill's on the staff.
Jerry Kill is on the staff there, and Beck, the quarterback, and I think they brought another player over, if I remember. So Vanderbilt's going to have a little bit of a different look, and everybody's really high on Virginia Tech, including me. And I think Virginia Tech wins that game pretty easily. So we are off and running, a memorable game for week 0 to start, and plenty coming as now the podcast moves to 3 days a week, though I think Pete's going to have some co-hosts as I have some double duty for the first couple of weeks of the season. So you guys enjoy. And
we have a deep roster. We hit the portal this offseason.
I feel like you're trying to push me into the portal here. So
not true, Rece.
We'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes. All right. Thanks for listening to the College Game Day podcast, the Dublin Recap Edition. Please download the podcast wherever you prefer to get podcasts, or better yet, subscribe so you never miss a single episode, and take care of the written and spoken word. Go read Pete's article and read it with admiration.